Did you know that Dan Bilzerian, the social media icon known for poker games, luxury jets, and wild parties, may have built his empire on money his father hid from the government? For years, we've seen Dan as the ultimate playboy, fearless and self-made. Behind the fancy lifestyle and Instagram posts, the Bilzerian family has a more complicated story. Let's take a closer look at their secret financial maneuvers, clever tactics, and year-long battle with the US government that might have helped Dan live the high life. Who is Dan Bilzerian? A name that was once ubiquitous on Instagram, dude built an entire personality out of flexing, Lambos, yachts, and just enough models to make the rest of us question our life choices. People started calling him the king of Instagram, which is honestly hilarious. He swore up and down that he banked all that cash from playing poker. Like, not just any poker, but those hush-hush fat-stacked private games you only hear about in movies. Beyond his social media presence, he made appearances in several Hollywood films and later founded Ignite, a cannabis and lifestyle company. While he often promotes himself as self-made, plenty of industry watchers remain skeptical about the actual origins of his wealth. Here is where Paul Bilzerian, Dan's dad, enters. It wasn't poker or Instagram fame that brought the Bilzerian name into the public eye. His name instead became virtually synonymous with the high-stakes, high-reward culture defining much of the financial world at the time. However, in 1989, everything began to unravel. The SEC launched an investigation and charged him with fraud. Paul was not just investing, he was secretly working with associates behind the scenes, manipulating stocks while attempting to take over companies like Cluet, Peabody & Co., and Hammermill Paper. His tactics were astounding, but they also crossed legal lines, and the consequences would follow him for decades. He was ultimately convicted, serving 4 years in prison and being fined $1.5 million, a substantial amount. But honestly, that was just the opening act. The entire legal drama with the government dragged on for years. The guy couldn't catch a break. However, Paul Bilzerian gets nailed for a crime, but the drama's nowhere near over. The SEC jumps in, basically saying, "Hey buddy, we want our cut," and slaps him with a civil suit to claw back what they call shady gains from his stock shenanigans. Fast forward to the early 90s, federal court says, "Yep, Paul, you broke the rules," and a $62 million bill lands in his lap, courtesy of the SEC. That's not pocket change. Paul never really fought the court's ruling. He didn't even bother. Instead, he kept repeating the same thing. Broke, flat out, busted, not a cent to his name. By 1991, he had officially given up and filed for bankruptcy. He swore up and down he'd scraped the bottom of every account he owned. According to him, the government played fast and loose with the numbers, blowing his profits way out of proportion. And those penalties, way too harsh, as Paul would say. Still, people weren't exactly lining up to believe his sob story. The feds were like a dog with a bone, chasing after him for years, pretty much convinced he'd squirreled away a fortune overseas. Maybe he even tucked some assets away under his kids' names. A classic move, right? As things dragged on, those hunches started to make more sense. It turns out that investigators uncovered a complex web of offshore shell companies and trust funds, and many of the breadcrumbs led directly to his sons, Dan and Adam Bilzerian. Eventually, courts and regulators came to believe that Paul had carefully structured his finances to appear bankrupt while quietly protecting his wealth. A federal ruling in 2001 even stated that he had moved millions specifically to avoid paying the SEC. While he presented himself as broke, the reality painted a much different picture. And after all the drama, the government barely clawed back away any of its $62 million that he was supposed to cough up. Seriously, just a sliver. The rest of the assets are hidden in trusts for his son to inherit later. The thing is, this whole setup was sketchy as hell, but technically legal at the time, thanks to some loopholes in trust and bankruptcy laws, and that trust essentially set the stage for Dan Bilzerian's wild, cash-fueled lifestyle that gained prominence in the 2010s. Here's the craziest part. Turns out Paul was quietly stuffing millions into all these sneaky overseas accounts and trusts. One shady trust was set up in the names of his sons, Dan and Adam Bilzerian. Yeah, the Instagram guy. That trust was a fortress. The government didn't stand a chance of getting their hands on it. Millions stashed away offshore, shielded by all sorts of legal wizardry. Meanwhile, Paul Bilzerian is in court playing the broke card, but secretly moving money into these trusts for his kids. However, it's no big mystery how Dan Bilzerian ended up living large with private jets, power blowouts, and all that flashy stuff on his social media. Having a setup like that made his lifestyle a lot easier. So Dan Bilzerian turned 30 back in 2010, and yeah, that's when he finally unlocked the family trust fund. Funny how his lifestyle went from zero to private jet and models almost overnight. He's always telling people he made his fortune playing poker, but honestly, the timeline's a little too perfect. He likes to say he took a tiny trust fund and somehow transformed it into a mountain of cash by being some poker genius and investing wizard. But you know how people talk? Most folks think his dad's secret millions played a way bigger role than he lets on. However, even prominent publications like Forbes and the Wall Street Journal have raised an eyebrow at his stories. There's not much evidence out there that he won the kind of poker money he brags about. It seems like there's a lot of flash, but maybe not as much substance behind all those wild stories. So what happened to Paul? He never paid the full $62 million. Over the years, the government recorded only a tiny fraction. Meanwhile, Paul reportedly moved to the Caribbean island of St. Kitts and got citizenship there. Some believe he did this to escape pressure from U.S. authorities. In interviews, Paul said he was mistreated. He argued that he was targeted because he was smarter than Wall Street and didn't play by their rules. He still claims he never committed fraud, despite being convicted in court. Moreover, he avoids talking about his dad's shady past, changing the subject, or deflecting with "not my problem." He admits to benefiting from family wealth, but claims that he also worked hard to achieve success. Oh, totally. Let's be real, Dan Bilzerian. It's like you're the internet's favorite guilty pleasure. Some people look at his wild, party-hard lifestyle and think, man, that's the life. All the fancy toys, the yachts, the weirdly endless lineup and supply of models. He's living out the wish list most people only daydream about while waiting in line for coffee. But, not everyone's buying it. Plenty of folks just laugh it off and say, come on, he didn't hustle his way to the top. A lot of that cash, thanks to his dad, who's got his own, colorful financial past. Not precisely the self-made story he tries to sell. And let's not forget Ignite, his company. It's been dragged through the mud by the media with lawsuits and some pretty shady headlines. Makes you wonder if it's all just one big Instagram mirage. So yeah, Dan's public image, all over the place. Sure, he's got the glam and the headlines, but behind the scenes, it's a jumble of family drama, lawsuits, and money. Let's say complicated. The dude might look like he's living it up, but a lot is going on under the surface that's not nearly as shiny. So sure, Dan's probably still out there somewhere, blowing money on ridiculous toys and posting about it for the likes. But behind all the noise, there's this sticky reality. His empire's still tangled up in lawsuits and family drama that never really went away. In the end, is this really about poker skills, or is it just another episode of Rich People Get Away with Everything? This story isn't just about being rich, it's about how some people use power and wealth to circumvent the system. So is Dan working hard for his money, or is he just another rich kid with a head start? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you found this interesting, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe.